the F5 Local Traffic Manager VLAN and Self IP configuration. So now we're going to get started putting things together so we can actually, well, make stuff work. That's kind of what we want to do here. So let's go ahead and get started. So in kind of looking at things here, we really want to get started with our F5 and make it do things. As a general rule, we have an interface that goes out this way, an interface that comes out here. I think that we've got another one configured that's, really going nowhere right now. But it gives us a way to start setting things up. Okay, so basically your big IP, your F5 big IP ADC, Application Delivery Controller, is a multi-layer device. So we've got layer 2 concepts, we've got layer 3 concepts in there. And so we're going to start with our basics to get us on a network before we add on the other stuff here. Now, cool thing is we can associate a physical interface, so we have 3 of them that are going to be defined on here, directly with a VLAN. So we can tell it exactly what it's going to be in there. Multiple interfaces can actually be in the same VLAN. So if I had a bunch, we'll probably say on the inside, if I had a bunch of different interfaces right here, I could really have a layer 2 VLAN just like a regular Ethernet switch. Or, conversely, we can use it for a trunk, so we can associate a single interface with multiple VLANs in there. The ADC can also act as a router. So it gives us lots of control in there. So we'll just call it, say, a switch or router. Okay, so it gives us some little options that we want to go with. Now, as we get in here from a switching perspective, when we look at trunks, it's all going to be industry standards. So 802.1q as far as my trunking. I will actually do LLDP as well, so I can do discovery. It's kind of like CDP, except the industry standard version of stuff in there. If you want VLANs to communicate with each other, okay, so by default, VLANs are going to be separated. If I want them, so I want, say, VLAN A and VLAN B, if I want them to communicate with each other, I will need to create a VLAN group. And so that's going to be how I'm going to, I guess, bond them, if you will, but make them talk to each other or allow them to talk to each other. Typically, we have the F5 ADC. You got to keep in mind it is a deny-based architecture. So it is not coming in here trying to be a router or trying to be a switch. It's really trying to deliver your applications. So with that in mind, it's going to be more application-centric and configuration-centric for what it is that you want to do. You have to want to do something in order to be able to tell it to do that. If that makes any sense to you. So basically, things have to be defined. Every VLAN that you have must have an IP address associated with this. So VLAN needs an IP, and this is called, so the term that we're going to use in here, called a self IP. So basically the IP of the F5 itself. Okay, very simplistic as you go in there. When we start looking at things like this, also from a definition standpoint or from a role standpoint, only admins, administrators, can create VLANs. So this is a system level control, so we do need to have a good role, if we will, in order to hop on here. It's good because any of our, which levels do we get down to, but any of our smaller, or I shouldn't say smaller, any of the administrators with less rights won't be able to go in and do full system level things like this. So we have a couple different types of things also when we get into the self IP. We have 2 different types to look at in there. One is static and the other is floating. And it's kind of an interesting way as far as thinking about these. So a static self IP is assigned to the big IP system only. So an interface IP right here is exactly where that goes. That is a static one. A floating one, on the other hand, is an address that the F5 will pay attention to, it will do things for, it may be assigned to, when we get into our pools or our virtual servers or NAT or SNAT or stuff like that, may be assigned to a service that the F5 is doing, but it's not bound directly to an interface. So those are the 2 differences on there. You must have a static IP. You may have floating IPs. So we're going to kind of see this as we go through the configuration for it. Now, when we do talk about our port lockdown, there are some exceptions to things. So when I start looking at stuff, let me box this off here. I have UDP and I have TCP. So as far as things that I will allow to come in, so 53, 161, 520, we'll have a quiz here in just a minute. 22, 53, 161, 443, and 4353. So those are the port numbers, the 5, 6, 7, 8 port numbers that we're going to be allowed in by default. And we'll get into some traffic selection where we can choose that or not. So 53 is DNS, very good. 161 is going to be SNMP. 520, there's one we don't always see here. Yep, that's going to be RIP. So we actually can allow some routing protocols as well. Well, RIP anyway, from a UDP standpoint by default. TCP, we have 22, which is SSH, 53, which is also going to be for DNS, usually my zone transfers, 161, my SNMP or my traps, 443 will be web-based, so SSL web. Now 4353 is a specific iQuery language. So that's more of an F5 specific thing. But these are, like I said, what is enabled by default on there. We have traffic group policies at that point in time. When we start getting into my traffic policies, I have a couple different types, okay, and they will be there by default. So traffic group or traffic group 1 in there, but traffic group we have one called local only, and then we just have group 1, so traffic group 1, that are defined by default. The local only is for stuff where there is a static IP or a static self IP address, basically things that don't fail over. Things that will not be highly available at that point. The group 1, the normal policy or regular policy, if you will, is for the floating self IPs. IAPs, virtual IPs, NAT, SNAT, stuff like that. Basically things that will fail over. Alright, so will fail over and no failover. And those are going to be my differences between traffic policies. Now, when we get to setup, okay, so we're going to get to configuration here in just a sec, I want to think about some VLANs as far as where we're putting things together in here, because I've got 3 VLANs that I'm going to play with. Okay, namely down here by my nodes, we're going to do VLAN 210. Up here, we're going to do VLAN 201. And really, I guess, kind of reserved for the future, we'll figure out what we'll do with that. But I've got a 202. I have an interface available anyway, based on how we've set the VMs up so far. So we looked at our initial configuration, at stuff that we did in previous nuggets. Now we're going to start setting things up so we can really move forward and get to the point where we're actually moving traffic back and forth on here. That's going to be the cool part that we get to. So let's go ahead and dive into the VMs and kind of keep this in mind, draw it out, whatever notes you need to make, and we'll go ahead and keep this moving on there. Alright, so let's kind of start playing around with things. We're into our web browser here, and go ahead and log in. Get myself going, and yes, it's telling me my license is going to expire, so I need to change that out. Which, by the way, and I'll find some way to put some details on here, you can order a lab license. There's a cost to it, so the 30-day thing is a free thing from F5. You can order a lab license, though. It's like $100, something like that, or a little under $100, and it pretty much gives you, lab capabilities. Very little throughput, but all of the options available. So another nice way on a more permanent basis to be able to play around and learn things and go forward with the VMs. So great way to do stuff, or probably your physical devices too. I hadn't thought about that. But anyway, I digress with that. I will fix my license on here. In the meantime, we're going to kind of step through and look at network, so my configuration as far as that's going to go on here of where I need to be at. Okay, so out of all of these things, my interfaces, so I can take a look at it, get my interface list involved, and I have to know how these were mapped within VMware. That's going to be very specific to where I'm at. So 1.1 will go to my clients. So my VLAN 201, this is VLAN 202, VLAN 210. This is actually VLAN 100, which is the internet side of things. So I'll get to play around a little bit with that too in terms of when we do software updates and things along those lines. Okay. So this gives me some options to play with around here, but each of them in and of themselves, so like if I click on one of them here, this is really kind of giving me my physical side of the properties. So, I'm enabled, that's perfectly cool. Tells me all the things that I can do, tells me LDP that I can send out or what information I'm going to send with it, and what the polling interval is, but there's not a whole lot else on here because my interface is, well, it's an interface. Right? It's kind of what I'm doing with stuff. When I get down over here, so I have my VLANs, I'll have my self IPs, that's where I'm going to be really getting into, and I guess my routes too, my IP routing, that's where I'm going to be getting into the base configuration that I need to set up on here. So my VLANs probably being the most important ones. And we'll go ahead and create a few of these so that we can assign them to my interfaces. So let's just make one called clients. Client VMs, and this will be 201. Okay. Now, notice my interfaces right here. I can do it either untagged or I can do it tagged, and it's just by virtue of which of these arrows that I hit over here and which interface that I pick. So this would be 1.1, and I will do it as an untagged interface over there because don't need to do really anything else festive for it at all. So we'll go ahead and have that, and that's really about it for the settings that I'm going to care about. Alright, so with that being said, I can go ahead and click Finished on there, and it will create my VLAN. Perfectly cool. Let's go ahead and add another one, and this will be my servers. So server VMs. By the way, your name cannot have spaces in it. You can do dashes and things like that for multiple words or long names, but can't have any spaces. This will be 210. And on 1.3, so put that over there, finished for that. Let's go ahead and create internet, the interwebs. Wide world of the unknown. There we go. Alright, and let's see, it is tag 100, but I'm going to do it untagged on that interface. Send that out. Okay, 1.4, that should be cool. So finish that. Alright, so what we have now is 3 of my VLANs. I can create the 4th if we want. I don't really have anything, we'll call it future. I don't really have anything set up right now. So we'll just say unknown 202. This way I have all of the interfaces on there anyway. So I'll go ahead and say that. Alright, so now I've got all of them on there. But as we go through, as we do everything, I'm good to go for that. Now it's a matter of adding IP addresses. So giving myself the actual IPs for where I'm going to be at. Remember, the difference between on an IP address, we had the static and we had floating. This is going to be a difference as far as where I am on it. So let's try this out. So I want to say client, let's call it client access gateway. That's cool. 192, 168, I had this in there from before. So net mask all 255s, that's going to be on client, so I have all of them to pick from. So we'll do that. Port lockdown. Now, what am I going to allow in from the clients? Remember, we had a list of those things before as far as what we were doing. Okay, so that list of stuff, remember that we had, DNS and SNMP and RIP and SSH and web traffic and iQuery or something like that. So I can allow none, which will do nothing at all, or I can just say allow default and kind of leave things as that. Yeah, we can go ahead and do that for now. I don't really have necessarily a way of caring one way or the other. Now, traffic groups. Picking one either floating or non-floating. Okay, so is this a floating address? And really the answer is no. It's going to be set directly onto the actual interface. I may change that when I get to an HA environment, because remember, my clients are going to use 254 as their gateway for things. But for right now, we can go ahead and we'll play around. We'll do 253. and I'll make this one a non-floating one. So that should be fine. So let's finish that. Oh, I put spaces in there. Okay, and actually I don't want to do that. So we'll say 5-1. So put dashes in here. So I'm glad that it kind of caught me at that. So because with 253, I'm going to have this be the address of this particular gateway. All right. So now we'll say finished because we're going to be non-floating, and that should be good. All right. Now I can create my client access gateway. So 201.254. Okay, so now we have that. So there's my net mask. It's going to be on clients, allow default, and here I will do it as a standard traffic group, so it is going to be a floating one. Now, you do have to have a static address configured before you do a floating one. All right? So it's going to, otherwise it would complain at you that you didn't have one. So very simple stuff. So when we do HA, this will be easier because this is a floating IP now. So I will go ahead and still respond to it, and that's all cool. Let me do the same thing. Where am I? Node F5-1 10.253. Okay, this will be on nodes or servers, I guess. Sorry, I forgot I changed that. We'll allow default, and this will be non-floating, so that'll be perfectly fine. So create that one, and then we'll create the gateway one for it. So again, when we get to failover, this will be much better. So node gateway, oops, 168.210.254 /24. So, whoops, servers. Okay, my floating one, that's all cool. So I can use the arrow keys, by the way, in those drop boxes. Alright, and I need one more address right here. It should be, what am I? Let's see, internet F5-1 10.100.211. Alright. Internet. And non-floating. So that is cool. So we'll do fine with that for right now. See, now, plain and simple, we have just gone and irritated me now. So I believe that I have a way to figure this out. So I have done a little bit of research, and apparently F5 is kind of picky about any other interface overlapping with the management one. So it's good. I mean, I understand the logical separation of church and state and all that jazz, but certainly of management versus what we call revenue ports or usable ports on there. I get it. I got no problem with that. Where is my console now? Okay, so there we go. So, when I look at these things, it's really kind of one of those just irritations. I get the idea. I'm okay with that, but there should always be a way around things. Right? And that's what I plan on doing. So, we're going to cheat. Right, so if it doesn't like my management port where it is, well, fine. Let's go move the management port. No, do not use automatic. No, I do not like this. That, honestly, it doesn't matter what my net mask is. Do you want to create a default for the management port? No. Won't do that. Are these the settings? Sure, we'll do that. Okay, so basically what I've done now is I've moved this to a network that I simply don't plan on using. Now, of course, this makes it inaccessible from a website unless I go reconfigure everything else and stick that network, that subnet onto my network, which I honestly don't plan on doing. So, we are also going to do a little command line on here, and this is kind of ahead of ourselves because we will have a nugget coming up in a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and set that information up. /23. And let's see if we can do that. Okay, cool. So we've done everything on here. So now, in theory, I should be able to get into the web browser. So here's going to be the moment of truth. Are we accessible? Connecting. There we go. So when in doubt, change the rules. So we have, let's see, my self IPs. Notice I have my iNet F1 on here, which is exactly what I'm connecting to right now through my internet part, so that's perfectly cool. Now, I do have it be on the same subnet as that, so we will want to set a default route on here as well. Route to the unknown. Okay. There we go, and we should be good with that now. So pretty much exactly the information that I had before in my management interface configuration, but now I put it to a revenue port so that I can actually kind of really get access, I guess, back and forth from my devices to and from the internet through the F5. Otherwise we would have had to have an additional or a separate path to do that, and it was just going to irritate me. So, bottom line, we win. We're good to go. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.